In May 2020, current UCL History students came together to reflect on their experiences at UCL History and to pass on their tips and advice to future cohorts of incoming undergraduates through a series of thematic panel discussions. The idea underpinning the project is for current students to help future cohorts to transition smoothly into life in our department and to create a stronger sense of community within the department. The project is led by Dr. Chloe Ayrton and Dr. Patrick Lanchner and builds on the work that the two of them started with the History Society at the Induction weekend in 2019, where they hosted a panel discussion with students on the theme of being a historian at university. Building on the concept of hosting panel discussions with current students, over the course of 4 days in May 2020, current students and history tutors came together to reflect on the experience of studying history at UCL and life in London. This video is one of the 9 panel discussions that we produced for the project. Welcome to our 4th panel discussion with UCL history students. This is panel discussion 4, how do assessments really work at UCL history? Students' experiences in essay writing, discussing marks, feedback and academic support. This discussion forms part of our UCL History Undergraduate Induction Student Panel Discussions project.
Hi, my name is Jade Burroughes. I'm a third year history student here at UCL and I'm co-convener of this project alongside Chloe. My particular research interests are situated in gender history in modern Germany, particularly sexual violence in the Holocaust. I will be pursuing these interests further as of October at the University of Oxford, where I'll be doing a Masters in Modern European History, and I am also the current UCL History Society President.
Hello, my name is Chen Hao Luo, and I'm a first year student at UCL History. My historical interests include intellectual history and cultural history broadly. Upon graduation, I'm thinking about doing a master and a PhD later to enter the academia or doing some academic research.
Hi, I'm Adila. I'm in my 2nd year, I'm going into my 3rd year. I'm most interested in global history, and for my extracurricular activities, I've been involved with UCL STAR, which is UCL Student Action for Refugees, and I've also been involved with UCL Islamic Society.
Hi guys, my name is Finn. I'm in my final year here at UCL History. My particular interests have been in kind of economic and cultural history, especially during the modern period. During my time at UCL, I was a member of a lot of different clubs and societies, but the one I'd like to mention is UCL Emperors, which is the American football team. I was a co-captain and I ran the Movember fundraiser in my final year there. My plans for post-university are to go back. I'm going to do a master's degree in management next year, either in London Business School or Smurfit in Dublin, depending on coronavirus circumstances. And I plan to go into a career in management consulting.
Hi, my name's Lauren. I'm a 2nd year student going into my 3rd year at UCL. My main interests throughout my degree have pretty much been American history, with a bit of British history, and my aspirations for after university, I'm not really sure yet, but maybe something within government.
Hi, my name is Kristen Allison and I am a 2nd year History with a Year Abroad student. I am hoping to go to the University of California, Santa Barbara at some point in 2021, and I am particularly interested in American foreign policy and immigration history. As with most 20-year-olds, I'm not really sure what I want to do in the future, but I am interested in possibly going into diplomacy or working for NGOs.
Hello, I'm Patrick Lanchner. I'm a historian of Europe and the Islamic world in the later Middle Ages, or what is commonly known as the Age of the Crusades, and I'm particularly interested in comparisons that cut across these different spheres of civilization. Together with Dr. Chloe Ayrton, I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussions with students and academics at UCL History about what it means to be a student and a historian at UCL.
I'm Eleanor Robson and I'm head of department here at UCL History. That means I look after all the staff and the students, and it's ultimately my responsibility to make sure that you have the best possible education while you're here with us. I'm also Professor of Ancient Middle Eastern History, which means I do a little bit of teaching on ancient Assyria, Babylonia and the Sumerians. Finally, I have a cat called Eliza, who has kind of become the department mascot over the past few months. She's not here with us right now, but I'm sure you'll meet her soon enough.
Hi, I'm Chloe Ayrton. I'm a lecturer here in the History Department at UCL, and I am leading, along with my colleague Dr. Patrick Lanchner, this really exciting project called UCL History Student Induction Video Resources, which really is part of the work that he and I are both doing in September to welcome in the new cohort of incoming undergraduate students. And we've been leading a series of panel discussions with current students to talk about various themes of life as a history student here at UCL. And you'll be seeing quite a lot of me over the course of these videos because I am chairing all of the discussions. So without further ado, we'll start our discussion. I just wanted to sort of think about this process. We've been talking a lot about the process of going from your A-levels or from your high school out of the UK, coming to London or starting at UCL History, and all of the feelings and experiences you go through, the anxiety, the fear, the excitement. And we've talked a little bit in previous panels about that social induction, the induction to the academic community, what the first year might look like, the kind of courses you take, and how formative those can be. But of course, one of the things that is, I think, on the top of many students' minds is the work they have to do, right? And how that's going to be assessed and what's expected of them. And I, as a personal tutor, I haven't taught much first year teaching yet, but as a personal tutor, I've had first years come through, and I really saw, you know, that experience, that transition, the excitement about writing, the fear, you know, all sorts of different emotions students went through in those first 4 or 5 months, and I tried my best to be there with them. But I sort of wanted to hear a little bit, you know, from you about that transition and how you coped with it and what you did, you know, as you first came through. But perhaps first, it might be important for us to just sort of give a sense to our new and incoming students. What exactly, you know, what kinds of work do you do in your first year and beyond? You know, what is the expectation of you, and how's that different perhaps from A-level or some other high school experience? And I know that Jade and I have spoken about this so much, you know, over the last few days. So I wonder, Jade, what are your thoughts on this matter?
So I guess the biggest change from A-level for me was going from the biggest essay I'd ever written was 1,000 words. And this essay had no footnotes, like no referencing, and was basically just me regurgitating things from a textbook. So I think the biggest change for me was coming to university, having no textbook, having 2,500 words to play with on as a standard like baseline word count for an essay, and having to engage with historiography in a way that I'd never done before. So shaping my argument in terms of what other people have said about a certain topic, and making my voice heard. Basically, it was a big change, and you know, referencing was also quite hard to get my head around. Footnotes are the bane of my existence, but yeah, I think it's not only length, it's content of essays that is quite different from coming from A-level. But as we've spoken about in the previous panel, there are a number of transition modules that help you with that process. So it's not like you're thrown in at the deep end and just expected to know how to write a really good undergraduate essay. Like, you are supported along the journey. But yeah, I guess the biggest difference for me was not only word count, but also like how you write the essays and what you include.
Yeah, just to add from Jade's point about historiography, I said this earlier, but the main difference for me was actually like critically evaluating the historiography in the secondary sources rather than just sort of regurgitating what people have said. Because obviously that's one of the key things you sort of need to do to get the best grades. And I think in my first year, I hadn't really thought about it. But looking back on it now, and especially coming into my second year, I understand actually how important that is. And that is such a big difference from A-level to university.
I think that's kind of what you have to understand coming into the 2,500 word essays, which make up the bulk of the coursework on UCL History. It really is a kind of relatively simple structure once you get to know it in terms of what you need to be doing, but it varies quite a lot. So to put it very simply, 2,500 words usually breaks down into about 8 paragraphs, which is an introduction, conclusion, and then two body paragraphs to discuss 3 different ideas. And when you kind of discuss these ideas in the body paragraphs, you're discussing other historians' ideas, but you're also kind of including your own, and you're including primary sources as well when you're kind of making your evaluation. And I think that's kind of the key point to get when you're kind of first doing these essays, is that it's not an evaluation that you did at A-level where it's purely on the basis of which argument makes more sense or where the evidence is more heavily stacked in the A-level textbook. It really is a subjective argument. It really is an argument that you're trying to make. You're not trying to tell the history of something. You're trying to say why something happened. You're trying to say what affected a certain event. You're trying to discuss factors in events, and you're trying to say which one is more important, which one makes more sense, and why.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful way of thinking about it. I think historiography can be a really frightening word for first years. And the way to think about it, I think, is just that it's the conversations that historians have had. And in order to join the conversation, you need to know at what point the conversation's got to, which are the boring bits, which are the irrelevant bits, which are the things you agree with, and you want to kind of, which side you want to join in on, and where you want to politely pick holes. So yeah, the historical conversation is all that historiography is, and it's important to be able to learn how to see where you are in that conversation, so that when it comes to a little bit later on in your degree, when you're starting to produce research for yourself, to be able to show, here's where what I'm building on, here's where I'm new, here's the contribution to the conversation I think I can make, rather than just listening in and reporting on the conversation, which is often what one's doing to begin with.
That's so wonderful, Eleanor. I completely agree. You know, this sort of getting students, it's so beautiful when students finally understand they can be part of that conversation and they can find intervention. And I wanted to bring Athena in because you've just done a research seminar, and so obviously dealing with a different kind of coursework, slightly longer. You know, what are your perspectives on this issue of the kind of writing you encounter and learn how to do?
Yeah, so engaging with historiography and the conversations that historians have had, you're not just placing yourself in that conversation, you're also learning so much more about methodologies, different perspectives. You're not just writing an essay just for the sake of it. You're really engaging with it. It's interesting, however boring essays might sound. Once you start engaging with historiography properly, they're actually really interesting. I just wanted to make a point about, as a first year, we might think that coursework essays or university style essays are so different from A-level essays. There's actually continuities within our coursework coursework essays, and even the exams, yeah. Like you're making your clear and clear argument, you're still using facts, you're still using statistics. So it's not something completely, you're just, I guess, yeah.
Could I just echo what Adila has said, and maybe also really what many others have said already? What we're really keen on is on you finding your own voice. We're not really interested in you just regurgitating other people's opinions. This is really about finding your own feet, finding your place at the table of that conversation that Eleanor has described. And that's really what tutors will be interested in. They will be interested in hearing what your views are and what your opinions are. And so try to listen to that inner voice inside you and find a way of articulating it. I think that's what assessments are ultimately about.
Yeah, I completely agree with Patrick on your personal voice, and I also think that although there are lots of similarities between A-level essays and university level essays, the skills you learned in A-levels and high school are still useful, but you have to kind of transfer the method of doing it a bit, because the essays in universities are much more flexible. You can advance your own argument through a variety of approaches and using a variety of sources in a different way. And those sort of things you will be learning in writing history sessions, and that give you a variety of possibilities of arguing for your own main arguments and trying to figure out all the logical relationships between different factors, different actors, and different people in the historical events and historical relationships.
Yeah, just following on from that, I think one of the nicest changes about coming to university is having a space to think differently and be rewarded for coming up with original perspectives. So an important thing to understand is that mark schemes still exist at university, but they are a lot broader and more flexible. And it's not a case of having a tick box list of certain events or people or dates you have to include in an essay. There's a lot more flexibility to bring in your own evidence and bring in an original point of view, which maybe hasn't been discussed before. And as Eleanor was saying, situate yourself in that conversation and bring something new to the table. And for me, that was one of the most exciting things about coming to university, because you don't feel constricted in what you can write at all. As long as you have a point of view that's substantiated with evidence or picks apart one part of historiography and it's valid, you can argue essentially whatever you want. And most essay questions give you the like space to do that. It's not so much as to an extent question at A level where you have to argue for, against, and then conclude. There is no formula to making the perfect essay at undergraduate, and actually the essays where you tend to explore and be a bit adventurous are the ones that you usually do best at, because you become so enthralled by the research process.
Going on from what Jade said, I think one of the most overwhelming things I found about going into first year and being able to write whatever I wanted was that I didn't know what I wanted to write. And everybody said to me, a good essay is original. And how can you be original when this has happened and everybody's written about it? And as an 18-year-old, I didn't think that I could add anything different to it. And it's not necessarily about having an argument that no one's ever thought of. That's, impossible, really. And I think it's more about, you could take the same argument as another historian and place it in a different context or using completely different sources. Or you could look at historiography and then focus in on one thing that you don't think is right by looking at primary sources that show completely opposite. And it's not necessarily saying, I found this amazing piece of evidence which completely undermines the entire traditional historiography. And I think that's sort of what I felt that I was expected to do. That's not true. It's just about finding what you're passionate about and looking really specifically at that within a broader topic. And that's what makes something interesting, I suppose, original. I think original can be a bit of a misleading word to use, I suppose, with essays, but it just means talking about something that you're passionate about from maybe a slightly different perspective, using slightly different evidence and sources.
Absolutely, I think that's a really lovely way of putting it. And I think originality can be a really scary concept, and it's not something that one should worry about. One should be thinking about what Kristen and Jade have said about working from the evidence rather than from what other people have said. You go back to the sources you're working with. You think, well, what do I think is going on here? And I think it's also important to say as well that it's not about agreeing with your tutor either, or trying to work out what the answer that they want you to come up with. You're not trying to second guess what their opinion is or kind of slavishly follow there. For me, I'm looking for exactly what Jay says, some good grounding in evidence, a plausible argument based on that. And if somebody can come up with an argument that's actually quite opposite to what I agree with, but is put in such a way that I can follow and make sense, then I will reward that with a good mark. And we might have a really interesting conversation about it in the feedback session about why my opinion's different, but I'm not going to mark that down. And I think that's the both. I think things that are both thrilling can also be a little bit daunting at first. There's the kind of the adrenaline rush of being in the new. But that the idea that one can produce history and produce an understanding of the past for oneself, rather than trying to absorb a consensus understanding that is in a textbook, is really what we're aiming at. And of course, one doesn't want to go completely off piste and, say that aliens were responsible for everything, for instance. And we're coming back to evidence and situating oneself into a grown-up conversation again. But yeah, just as like you're in a conversation, you want to have something interesting to say that other people can respond to, that is relevant and links into to what's gone before.
I feel like we've got a really good sense through this really invigorating discussion about what it really is to write history, right? And what the kind of things we're doing into having an intervention in scholarly debate, interpreting evidence, coming up with questions, finding interesting areas to research. A lot of what hasn't been said specifically, but I think is really behind a lot of this is passion, right? And following your kind of intellectual passions and journeys. And so I feel that that's really interesting in terms of getting a sense of, even if there are different word limits, 2,500, 5,000, 10,000, a lot of the things that we're doing, what we've been discussing, we sort of fit within all of those, right? But I guess when I'm thinking about these 18-year-olds who I was the personal tutor for 2 years ago, for a lot of them, before they even get to there, there's a sense of what, there's this essay, and they understand what it has to have, but there's a whole process between having the essay completed and submitting it, between before and after. And I'm wondering what your experiences were in terms of, how do you choose on a topic? How do you choose an essay question? How do you know that you're doing an intervention, or you're reading the right scholarship? How do you select your evidence? And what are all the sort of non-formal processes? I know as a tutor, I spend a lot of time with both Adila and Kristen this year, talking about their ideas before they actually even started writing or researching. So I'm just wondering what your experiences were about if we think about it rather than the writing product, but a process that we go through every year. I can see that Jade and I have had so many conversations on this, so perhaps Jade might want to start us off on her thoughts.
Yeah, so generally, in terms of selecting what I want to do for essays, in first year, I tried to go for questions that I thought I could answer very easily. And that actually turned out to be quite difficult, because the questions I thought I could answer easily were like based on what I'd done at A-level. So I'd done it, I'd basically written these essays like multiple times by this point. So I just tried to replicate the arguments I'd made at A-level, and I didn't try and push myself intellectually to even pursue other avenues. And it was in second term, I think, when I started to be like, this isn't pushing me in the way I want it to. And I picked a completely out of the blue question. It was an economic history question, which is just not my forte at all. And I took it in a social history direction. I took it completely away from what it was intended to be like. And it didn't work out, but I wanted to experiment with it and see where I could go with it. And speaking to my tutor, I went to my tutor for feedback afterwards, and he was like, I really like the direction you took this in. It just wasn't quite what we were looking for. But I think for me, it was when I started kind of experimenting that I really started enjoying the research process of prepping for essays. And I think a big part of that, so for this essay, for instance, because I'd never done economic history before, I went to see my tutor before I started writing the essay as well. And I basically sat down with him and I was like, I've never done this before. Could you give me any reading recommendations, any avenues to research? And he gave me a whole document. He's emailed me over some articles, some reading recommendations, some key scholars to look at. And that was an immensely useful resource to get me started. And it really did help. And then afterwards, the feedback again gave me, if I was ever to do this question again, gave me avenues to look down in that way. So I think fostering those relationships with your tutors as early on as possible is such a key resource that you should definitely exploit, because they are there to push you and make sure that you fulfill your potential, essentially. And having that resource there, you definitely should exploit it, because it helps you pursue new avenues, helps you in terms of searching for your resources. And it can just be a nice resource to have if you're stressed about an essay and you just need someone to sit down and talk your ideas through with.
This is so interesting, Jade, and it kind of feeds back into all the discussions we've been having over these last few days about the finding your anchor, your intellectual anchor within the department. And I think part of the process of the essay writing is a key moment when you develop those relationships with tutors, right? So you're taking a course on economic history and you suddenly think, well, I might be interested in this particular question. You go and have a meeting, and probably very few first year students understand that that's the beginning of the development of this really important relationship, intellectual relationship, that may well become your anchor as you go through the department. And I think maybe having sort of more in Spanish, conciencia, consciousness about that might help students feel confident to really come and have those conversations early on. So I just wanted to kind of bring that in, because the anchorship thing comes up on every panel, and maybe this is the moment we think about the essay as the process. I wonder, Finn, you're another final year student. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you really can't underestimate the importance of the person who's actually teaching the course in writing your essay. usually, to give a brief overview, like when you're writing an essay, you're choosing something from a list. For most of your modules, the only question that you really get to say, I have no idea. There's no kind of set guidelines on what question you're answering, is your dissertation, your second year research seminar. So you are given a little bit of a choice between like, okay, there's 20 different topics or 10 different topics on this course. I'm going to choose one and I'm going to write about it. And I think speaking to your professor, there's a lot of different ways that you can take the argument once you've kind of chosen what question you're trying to answer. And speaking to your professor can give you an idea of what directions you're thinking about going into. But at the end of the day, the research is for you to do. They're not going to give you an argument to use. They might say, yeah, you're kind of on the right track, or no, you're kind of missing the point of what that reading is trying to say, what that historian is trying to say. But it's really up to you to kind of do that reading. But just going back to what Eleanor said earlier about how you kind of have to situate yourself within the existing historiography, that sounds quite difficult. I'm fully aware of it. In your head, you're like, I have to read every book on this topic. That's crazy. But the reality of it is, doing just a few readings, like 3, maybe 4 readings max, you already start to build a pretty good picture of what the argument is within this topic and what the kind of points of debate are within this topic. And it might seem like there's nothing new for you to say. It might seem like there's no new angle to take this, but I promise you, as you do these kind of core readings, they literally give you core readings on most of the courses for each week. As you do the core readings, you start to say, okay, I know what the kind of question is here. I know what the arguments are here. And then it really just boils down to, can you come up with a handful of ways in which you kind of disagree with, the existing historiography? And if you can do that, you can be very, very successful on these essays without having to read 1,000,001 books and speaking to your professor every day. Like, it isn't as intimidating as it might sound.
Yeah, I completely agree. Just want to add one more point about reaching your professors, and because do approach your professors like in the meantime when you do your research. Like, I did some research about for my survey summative essay, and I got some points and ideas that I want to discuss with my lecturer and discuss with him, and it turns out really helpful to kind of further my research to develop my ideas and to make it more sound and more the argument more convincing. So if that's possible, do discuss your ideas with tutors in the meantime when you are researching.
One of the things that came up in our earlier discussion was about how terrifying it actually is to go to someone's office hours and have that first discussion. And I wonder, I mean, you're a first year, how did you do it? Did you just send them an email, or did you just turn up at the office hours? Or maybe you didn't have that same fear, but I know that others here did have that fear. And I think just finding the confidence to make that first move and develop that intellectual relationship is so important. So perhaps we can bring that in at some point as well.
Yeah, I talked to a senior before I came to UCL, so I thought that maybe this is the purpose of our session and giving this advice. And so I emailed Patrick, that's my tutor for my civil module in first year, and he was really friendly, and so that's why at the first office hour I just turned up, and we were all making very exciting and very intellectually stimulating conversations. That's my experience.
Yeah, I was just going on from that, Junhao. I'm somebody who kind of had the opposite experience, where I really didn't speak to my professors outside of the classroom until my second year, which was a huge mistake. And I remember the first time I went to an office hour and got real feedback on the essays that I'd done came in second year, after I got a pretty bad mark on one of the essays I did. And I kind of spoke to my professor then, and I started speaking to all my professors throughout all of their office hours. And quite literally, over the space of 3 months, the average mark I got on my essays increased by 7% or something like that. And it really was just because I got the kind of interaction that you really need. And it is hard. Sometimes it is. For some people, it's really easy, but for some people, it's really hard to first kind of make that step and interact with your professor. And they're very nice, but even, you're still the kind of new guy there. You're still, I'm sure a lot of people can sometimes feel afraid. If you don't feel comfortable going and speaking to them in person in their office hour, a great way to just introduce yourself is to send an email and to just ask a simple question, to say, hey, can I speak to you? They'll always say yes, pretty much, and they'll send you their office hour times. And you don't even have to ask them for their email in person if you're too scared to do that. UCL, through their kind of Outlook email function, has a directory with every single email in the entire university on it, and you just have to put in their name and it'll pop up. It's incredibly easy to do this, but you do have to take the first step.
Jade, what's your sense?
I was just going to kind of jump on something that Finn said about him going to seek essay feedback after he got an essay back that he wasn't too happy with, because that was kind of what forced me to start utilising office hours as well. So I got an essay back in second year that I was like, I don't know if I deserved that grade. I went and kind of queried it with my tutor. I just wanted to know like what it was that I'd done wrong, because I was quite happy with the essay. And after that, I realised that like feedback can be so invaluable, because he basically, my tutor told me something about my essay that I hadn't even noticed when I was writing it, and I was like, that is such a valid point, and I really do. That is something I want to work on now. So I think a big thing is like I avoided seeing tutors for so long because I was frightened they'd say something that would like really lower my self-esteem. But then as soon as you start utilising office hours, you realise that they really are so constructive in their criticism, and it is the best way for you to improve, by going and speaking and seeing about what your weaknesses are, and to work on them. And I think that like seeing their feedback as helpful rather than hurtful is the way forward, because like Finn, after I started utilising office hours, like both before my essays and after for feedback, my grades reflected that and they did get better.
I think that's really important. I think I have lots of conversations with prospective students about contact hours and what they mean is lectures. And I always want to say to them, lectures is only a tiny fraction of it. Actually, the real teaching happens in the one-to-one, in the office hours, in the conversations, in the exchange. And, you know, we can't force students to go to office hours. And it's really frustrating when they don't. I hate sitting in an empty office hour. I love having the conversations, because we as tutors put all our effort into really designing courses which we hope will stimulate you into thinking in new ways about history. And we're not expecting essays that just give us the right answers, whatever they be. We don't want obedient students, or we want students to turn up and engage, but we want to be challenged. We want to have great debates with our students. We want to learn from you. It's not just a one-way street. And the best fun I have is sitting on the sofa in my office with a student, chatting about the ideas that they're developing. And so both in the course of developing the essay and then afterwards, once it's completed, all of that learning happens, and it's incredibly exciting and stimulating on both sides. It's not an imposition at all on us as tutors. That's what we want. We want people to come to our office hours and say, hey, I found your stuff really exciting, or hey, I found this really difficult, help me with this. It's what we're here for.
Yeah, I just want to add a point on top of what Jade said about the feedback, and the feedback really helps. It doesn't hurt. And I remember because history is like a humanities subject, and different people have different viewpoint, and even when regarding how good an essay is. So different tutors, sometimes some of the tutors are harsher, but some of them maybe give you higher marks. But in the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because we've got some like second remarking of the essays and coursework you submit. But the point that you have to bear in mind is that asking for feedback is really helpful, because when I got a really the lowest grade in my first year for an essay about approaching history, and everybody else was talking about how harsh the lecturer was. But I because of the COVID-19 situation, I emailed the lecturer, and the lecturer really gave a lot of good advice on my essay, and I was thought, oh, I didn't think about it, and it really makes my essay much better if I did this. So do you ask advice even if the grades seem really bad?
I just sort of want to reiterate again just how important it is to go and see your tutor, because I remember before, like, I was talking to one of my personal tutor, and I said I had no idea how to do historiography, and I was like, do you put it in the beginning? Do you put it throughout? Like, how do you integrate it into the essay? And he said, oh, I prefer it like, each paragraph. I don't like it all at the beginning. I prefer you to integrate it into each paragraph. And then I went to talk to one of my tutors about, like, in one of my modules, and he said, oh, I prefer it if you put it in the beginning. So I was like, wait, what do I do then? Because everyone is asking for different things. But that is why it is just so important to go and talk to your tutors, because obviously everyone is going to have different things that they prefer. And yeah, there is a single mark scheme, but obviously, like, tutors are going to have their own opinions and their own sort of what they look for in an essay.
I really love that you brought that up, Lauren, because one of the, I think, the interesting things that happens to students over the course of 3 years is they end up developing their voice and their confidence as historians, and they end up, writing in particular ways that suit, their own intellectual journey. And of course, when you go and speak to a tutor about the kinds of essays they write, that's their voice as well in some ways. And so all of you over the course of this period, and I've just seen my special subject students go, produce really extremely very different voices and ways of writing essays, each of them brilliant and valid in their own way, but there's no sort of formula. So I really like that idea of the process and having these conversations with tutors and learning from them, but also challenging sometimes as well. So it's really very interesting. I wonder, what Eleanor has to think about this.
Yeah, I would say that, I don't want anyone to think that these are just sort of whims of tutors, that often history isn't one. It's a big family of different ways of doing stuff. So I'm a historian of ancient Iraq, and in my subdiscipline of history, there's a particular conventions, a particular ways of dealing with the material. And so if you're working in modern economic history, it might be completely different. And you, as a student, you get to explore lots of different subdisciplines of history as we do less. Actually, you have the privilege of amazing range. So having those conversations that, okay, approaching history teaches you kind of what the core is, and you get some sense of those disciplinary differences through approaching history. But especially if you're moving out of your own self-defined comfort zone into another slightly different world, having a conversation with the tutor saying, you know what, not sure about this, can you help me? No one is ever going to laugh at you, no one is ever going to sneer at you. However bad you think your first attempt is, I guarantee you we would have seen worse, and we survived it, and so did the student, and our job is to help you make it better. So never be shy, and always come and ask for support, because that's, we're here to teach and to help you learn and gain confidence and ability in history, and it is the best thing.
Sorry, go ahead, Finn.
I was just going to say, just coming from that kind of discussion of doing better and improving, something that me and Jade both brought up was that we both got pretty bad grades on an essay in second year. And I think you kind of have to understand, and you kind of have to keep this in mind, that everybody who I've spoken to on this course, which is a number of people, has gotten a bad grade at some point in their time at UCL. A bad grade can mean different things for different people. But for a lot of people, it can suck. It can be very, very heartbreaking and very, very stressful to get a bad grade, because a lot of people are very, very worried about the marks. They're very, very worried about being successful, which is understandable. But that being said, for me, and I think Jade was saying something similar, getting that bad grade can be a trigger for something good. Getting that bad grade can mean that you go to the professor and you get feedback afterwards. And the feedback afterwards, I'll speak right now, is just as important, if not more important, than the feedback before, especially when you're in your first couple of years and you're trying to get your marks together. If you look at the way that the course is structured, really your first year and probably the first half of your second year, you can, be unsuccessful, and you can, you can kind of struggle with the content and not get the best marks. But if you take lessons and if you learn and if you improve on the core skills that you really need to learn, then you can still be very, very successful in your third year of your degree. So I really would say, not only before your essay is written, but also after your essay is written, get the feedback. If you get a bad grade, whatever, you've got a bad grade, you can make up for it. You can continue to make up for bad grades even until your third year. And at the end of the day, what you're really at UCL to do is you're at UCL to learn and to improve. And getting those bad grades, if you do get them, it shouldn't be something that you take to heart, you feel personally. It should be something where you say, okay, I messed this up. What do I need to do differently next time? And there are resources to get that feedback that you really do benefit from.
I really love that intervention, Finn. It kind of moves us so well into the next segment of discussion, which is sort of what does assessment mean? What do marks mean, right? And I think for a lot of us who work with students, I mean, I spend all of my time trying to say to them, like, you are not defined by any mark you ever get, that someone in authority has given you. You are your own person with your beautiful journey and experiences. And, I may have determined that this particular piece of work merits this particular mark, but actually, you may go on and surprise me and become, any number of amazing things. And I think for students, disassociating themselves and their merit as people from marks given to them by this academic community is so important, not just for surviving the academic experience at university, but as you go on and have a healthy life balance in your world of work after university. And so I guess I wanted to sort of open up the discussion a little bit on that, on how to deal with meanings of marks, how to build on it through feedback, but also thinking a lot about managing stress, managing anxiety. For so many first years, this is a really, really difficult time where they really experience quite a lot of trauma with regards to expectations of marks, how assessment's going to work. And so I'm just wondering what your experiences might have been within that, and sort of like, I guess, putting the marks in perspective a little bit and thinking about it within that broader intellectual journey.
I was just going to say that, so Eleanor's my personal tutor, so she has plenty of experience of me coming to her and worrying that my grades, so if I get a grade that's doesn't kind of meet what I want and what I aim to get, that it will reflect badly on me, that tutors will look down on me or think less of me. And I remember one meeting, I just went and I cried over a silly grade. It was like a 65. It was absolutely fine, but because it was lower than what I'd been getting, I thought I'd failed, and that I was like somehow decreasing in quality as a historian. And Eleanor was just like, you're human. There will be these days when, all these essays that you just don't get as good grade as you have in the past. And that's fine, because what I've learned finally in my last year is that the degree is not it's not like A-level where you're trying to make the grade to go, get those certain grades to get into university. It is more like a process, and what's more important than the grade is what you learn from your experiences writing the essays and the research and the skills you pick up. And usually when you stop fixating so much on getting the grade and actually enjoy the process of writing and researching the essay and getting involved in the academic community at UCL, that's when your grades will start to reflect your passion, and you will do better.
If I could just come in on that from a tutor's perspective, I think you couldn't say something more true, Jade, because the real danger is when you become a slave of grades. You're at university to be challenged, and you're at university to think outside the box. If you only play safe all the time by doing the things that you think you may be good at, you will never think outside that box. So I would really say, especially to those of us watching us in their first year, just forget about grades, especially in your first year. You will see they pick up and you will see there's a correlation, but really think about learning and think about challenging yourself. Do those things that seem difficult for you, and then you'll be better at doing them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Obviously, it's going to be really hard for you to sort of differentiate your academic worth from your own self-worth. And I know that especially in A-level and school, I place a lot of my own self-worth on how well I was performing academically. And I still do to an extent at university, obviously everyone does. But I think it's also about realizing that there will be fluctuations as well in your grades. So sometimes you'll do really well and sometimes you might not. And that's fine. You shouldn't feel really down on yourself about not doing well. And there will be topics that you don't 100% understand or you don't 100% excel in, and that's fine. But it's just about trying to unlearn the habit of associating how your self-worth with how well you're performing academically.
I think it's so important to remember that university is an academic and a social experience. And if you let stress and grades completely direct your university experience, you're going to come away from those 3 or 4 years and find that you've wasted that time when you could have been making friends and enjoying societies and also enjoying this really relaxed intellectual exchange between professors, between friends. And it's actually a really enjoyable time in your life. And I think I found in second year, especially when the grades matter more, that sometimes I become so overwhelmed with my essays. And it's actually you do better when you take a step back from them and you think, okay, I'm going to go out tonight and I'm going to take a step back from my work and enjoy being in London and being a student. And if you spend weeks and weeks agonizing over your laptop, over articles and chapters and over your work, you're just going to completely lose any insight into what you're writing about. I've submitted work which I've thought is awful, and then it's actually done really well because I've just spent so long looking at it and completely lost any other idea of what I'm writing about. So just taking that time to sort of balance your work life, which is really hard. I'm aware of that. I haven't mastered it. But sort of taking time to enjoy your work and enjoy the process of it and also enjoy the social aspect of uni. Because I think it's, you need to enjoy both of them. Otherwise, you're just going to come away from uni completely hating it.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what other people are saying, and just to remind everyone that actually, the first year marks contribute a tiny amount to your degree. We did do that deliberately so you can spend the first year experimenting and getting things wrong and trying the difficult stuff, and it doesn't matter. And wouldn't it be terrible if there wasn't any room for improvement right from the beginning? So you've come from this situation where you're in this incredibly familiar environment. You're the veteran from high school, from sixth form college, and you know everything, you know what to do, and you walk in feeling terribly confident, and then suddenly you're the complete newbie and you've got to learn it all again. And we know that, and that's why the first year is just baby steps. And so you just have to trust yourself and trust us and relax into it and learn how to enjoy it. And then the rest follows, I think.
I just wanted to touch on something and interject a little bit here. But we've spoken about dealing with stress a couple of times throughout this kind of conversation. And I think it is important to say that for a lot of people, being able to balance your kind of university work and the kind of rest of your life can become a struggle. I know there's other panel discussions about this a little bit more, but especially when you kind of first come into university, you're responsible for a lot more than just your work, which is kind of what happens when you're at A-level. But there are kind of methods in place for you to handle this. There are reasonable adjustments. You can get extensions purely on the basis that you haven't been able to manage your workload due to the amount of stress that you're dealing with. And not only is this something which is possible, it's something which is relatively common. I can't speak for the exact number, and I know we're not allowed to release that, but I would say probably a majority of the people that I've spoken to have had some form of extension on an assignment due at some point in their 3 years of university. And for a lot of people, the first time you get it, you kind of feel like a failure. You kind of feel like, oh, should I really be doing this? Am I taking the easy way out? You're not. Getting the extension, if you need it, is completely fine. It really doesn't affect anybody. There is a process of doing it. You do have to supply some evidence, but that's obviously in place just to make sure. But just speaking to your personal tutor to kind of deal with your workload and deal with your stress is something which can make a huge difference in your ability to enjoy your life, in your ability to be successful in your degree, which is really why you're at university.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. I think it's really important to get rid of this kind of semi-stigma that's kind of around getting applying for reasonable adjustments and even just asking for help at university. I feel like a lot of people are really reluctant to do it because they feel like, you come to university and the whole emphasis is on being independent and being an adult. But that doesn't mean you can't ask for help if you need it. The tutors are more than aware that university is a big step up for a lot of people, and it can be a very, very stressful environment, especially if you have pre-existing mental health conditions. And I think it's so important to realise that those measures are in place so people can exploit them, and there is no shame in doing so. Like, I was very reluctant to apply for reasonable adjustments in my first year because I thought then that would mean I was working less hard than everyone else, and because I'd have like a week's extension on some of my essays. And I thought, well, that's not fair, because, you know, why should I have that and other people don't have that? But the truth was that my anxiety and my depression, which I've suffered from for like 10 years, does affect the way I work. And sometimes I do need a break away from that, like, get out of my head for a bit. And that's what reasonable adjustments allows you to do. And so you can still feel like you can feel okay, and you can still do, like, bring your best to your work. And I think it's really important that people exploit that if they feel they need it, because I know plenty of people that don't feel like they can apply for it because their problems aren't serious enough, and that's just not the case at all.
I think that really ties into your writing is always going to be evolving. You're always going to be improving it, and it's really important for you to make use of all the support that's available to you. So whether that's, you know, I think there's something called the writing lab. You can really make use of that to improve your writing. Talk to your tutors, talk to your lecturers. And if you do need if you do need adjustments, extensions, whatever, you like really do make use of these things, because at the end of the day, you really just want to improve your writing and improve yourself as a student and, you know, a historian.
Thank you so much, Adila, for that. I really agree. You know, there's so many resources available, and even right now over the summer period, I've sent a lot of students to the writing lab who are working virtually at this moment. You know, under the UCL's closed, and it's really important, I think, to make use of all of these structures available to help with your writing, and also to realize that there is no shame whatsoever in needing extra time. What we want is for you to do the best work you can do. You know, and use all of the resources and support available. And as a personal tutor, I often spend a lot of time, you know, helping students to get access to those resources. So again, when we come back to the panel on personal tutoring, use your personal tutors to help you also to access a lot of those things. And it's really been such a fascinating discussion. We're running out of time, so, you know, we're not going to have a huge amount more time. But I really want to sort of end this on a high and think about, for me, coursework. Whenever students come and talk to me about marks, I always think, marks are important, but really what's important is your journey. Like, what intellectual problem have you attacked this term? And every time I see my personal tutees, I'm like, so what was the big, you know, historical area that you really got involved with an approach, a method, or a provocative question? And thinking about the ways that these coursework shapes you. When I talk to my research seminar students, Kristen and Jade will notice, I'm always like, you're probably never going to do anything on Black Atlantics ever again. But what I want you to think about is, what are you going to take from this course that you're going to build on, and it's going to help you in your special subject, whether it's research skills or way of thinking, way of writing, development of voice. And so I think, you know, one of the things that I'd like some of you to reflect on is, what is the coursework that has shaped your intellectual journey? And maybe it was an essay you did in approaching, or a making history video, or a special subject dissertation. But what was the thing that's really shaped you as an intellectual, as a historian, as a thinker today? And I know Finn and I have been talking about this, you know, quite regularly over the last few days. So maybe you could start us off, the coursework that shaped you in your intellectual journey as a historian.
Sure. So for me, one of the things I really struggled with through my first couple of years was using primary sources the right way. And it's something that a lot of people struggle with, because you basically don't do it at A level. So in my second year, towards the end of the year, I had a coursework essay where I discussed the impact of Dante's Inferno on religion in Italy, and how it kind of reflected religious attitudes. And I basically just used Dante's Inferno as the entire thing. There was a bit of secondary literature on there where I kind of discussed arguments. But what I did was just an investigation, and I just went through basically canto by canto, which is chapter by chapter, whatever, in the Inferno. And I kind of talked about the different points where he kind of included different arguments and different ideas, which kind of reflected his own kind of very countercultural religious attitudes. Countercultural is a bit of the wrong word to use there, but his kind of anti-establishment religious attitudes. And kind of since then, I've had a lot more respect and understanding for just how to use primary sources, and it's become a really big part of how I write, where I've shifted from only talking about other people's arguments to really ignoring theirs and just talking about what I have to say and what I think. And it made me a lot more successful in my grades. My grades increased a lot because I just kind of learned how to use that. And I think everybody has the first essay where it clicks. And it might not be in your first year, it might not even be in your second year, but at some point you write an essay and you're like, oh, wow, this is how I write an essay. This is so easy now because I kind of know, not easy, but you know what you need to do. And when you start doing that, the essays go from being something which is scary and terrifying and difficult and just a huge problem to being something where you look at it and you kind of immediately start picking up on what you're going to say and kind of what your process is. And it is a very personal process to writing an essay.
For me, I think it was definitely my second year research seminar. So it was like the first extended piece of writing that we'd done at university. So it's 5,000 words, heavily primary source based. And it was the first point that we'd been like actively encouraged to like come up with an original point of view and like actually be very authoritative and be like, this is what I think, you know, and come up with kind of an original perspective on either an issue that's been discussed but from a different angle or an issue that's been like neglected. So I did mine on the women's liberation movement in Britain, but I did it from a perspective of the use of therapy and how mental health activism linked into women's lib. And that's something that's very under researched basically. And as part of my research process for this, I had to go to the archives for the first time. So I went to LSE Women's Library. They have a big archive there with women's liberation documents. And I remember looking at this poem that was scribbled on the back of like a women's lib propaganda poster. And it was just this woman had just written a little poem on the back. And I just remember thinking, wow, like that's history. Like, that a woman sat and wrote this in pencil 50 years ago. And I was like, it just blew my mind. And I was like, this is why I want to do history. And it was a big moment for me because I realized I wanted to go into academia at that very moment, because I was like, I have the ability to take these documents and turn them into something that people were actually going to read and like discover outside of the archive. And I just think for me, that was a really transformative experience.
Yeah, I'm similar to Jade in that it was my second year research seminar that sort of solidified that you're actually a historian. Like in my past essays, it's more I felt like a history student, whereas with the second year research seminar, because you are focusing in on like primary sources, you're looking really critically at like the secondary sources. And in my project, I just focused in on one figure, and I realized actually this figure's history counteracts. So I did mine on the Pilgrimage of Grace, so like Tudor history. And I realized that this figure's history counteracted a lot of the popular theories on Tudor history. And I was like, wait, actually, this person like does not match up with everything else I know about Tudor history. And it was just so transformative for me. And yeah, it was just really important piece of work that really just did solidify that, yeah, I actually am a historian and I had something original and independent to say.
It's really so wonderful as members of staff and historians and teachers to hear these experiences of yours and the formative moments, because we all remember our own formative moments as well, right, at different stages in our careers. And really fascinating to hear actually the significance of the research seminar in many of these discussions. So in Patrick and I and Jade, will be talking with other students in a few days about really what is that research seminar and special subjects and what are we getting out of it. It's going to be fascinating to see how students that sort of putting their intellectual passions in that and having really formative moments. But I think just going back to the kind of theme that's come across over the last few days about the finding the anchor in your space in the academic community of the department, but also in the profession, right, in a way. And also the building blocks of the degree. So from the first year in the course, you're learning all these building blocks through these early essays to then go and do a really formative piece of work in your research seminars and beyond. So it's sort of really interesting to hear that it is working, and you all do seem to be, developing these skills along the way in really interesting ways and developing as really interesting thinkers. So that's really fascinating. I know that we don't really have very much time left, and before I thanked everyone for their time and generosity and participation and reflection, I'm just wondering if anybody would like to raise any questions or anything that you'd like us to go back to at this point before we finish off. Okay. So really thank you all so much for this really invigorating panel and discussion. And I feel like this has really taught me a lot about what it is we're teaching and how to teach it better in future years. And it's just so exciting to hear that you've all developed some really key skills in writing history, and how you're thinking about history, and just to be able that you've allowed us to accompany you on your intellectual journey at this moment of reflection is really wonderful. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists and especially our staff members, Eleanor and Patrick, who've been with us and really brought a lot of richness to this discussion.